I'm about to introduce someone who needs no introduction, but he's going to get one anyway. Gordon Brown has been the founding and guiding spirit of our Scottish future, and he's going to speak and introduce two further speakers, our good friend David Sainsbury and Dan Turner. Gordon.
Thank you. Can I first of all thank the Lord Provost, thank the Chamber of Commerce for their organisation of this event, and particularly thank you for coming today on a Friday to participate in a discussion about not just the jobs of today, but the jobs of the future. And I want in particular to thank Glasgow University and the principal, Anton Muscatelli. I was once a university lecturer, and I know that universities stand for rationality, objectivity, impartiality, the pursuit of the truth, the search for knowledge, and these were all the qualities I had to leave behind when I went into politics. I'm particularly pleased to be able to introduce an international group of speakers, and if I don't say something about people who've come from just within Scotland and Britain, I hope you'll forgive me, because we have been very fortunate today to be able to bring from different parts of the world speakers of great distinction in their own particular field and who've got something very important to say about the future of jobs in Scotland. One of our first speakers is Michael Spence, who is, as many of you may know, a Nobel Prize winner. He's come all the way from Italy, on his way to China, and then to, I'm told, Kenya, to be with us today, so we thank him for coming. Michael is an expert on artificial intelligence, and he is writing widely on that subject, and I know that you'll find his contribution both stimulating and very constructive about Scotland's future. Michael, thank you very much for coming to join us. We do appreciate it. And I would like to also introduce Kate Bingham. Kate Bingham, you will know, was the head of the Vaccines Task Force. She, because of her efforts, saved thousands of lives as a result of the speed at which the vaccines were created and the way that that was managed. And she is also an expert on venture capital, and she's come from traveling across Europe and America to be with us today. Kate Bingham, thank you very much for coming to be with us, and she's with us today. I'd also like to introduce Kasim Kutai. You will have heard of Novo Nordisk, which is the most successful company in Europe over these last few years, dealing with diabetes, insulins, but also this weight loss injection. The company Novo Holdings that Kasim is head of is investing heavily in the jobs of the future, in the new industries of the future, so much so that Denmark, where he works from, has become such a successful part of the modern ecosystem for technology and the future. So, Kasim, welcome here, and thank you very much for coming today. I'd also like to welcome Jim Rowan. Jim Rowan actually comes from Glasgow, but he's been head of BlackBerry, Dyson and Volvo, and travelled the world and applying technology to manufacturing. And I know you're going to enjoy hearing what he's saying today. Welcome back to Glasgow, Jim, and thank you very much for coming. And can I also introduce someone who has worked in Australia, is about to go back to Australia, but is also the head of the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Organisation, Andrew Mackenzie. Andrew Mackenzie, again, is a Scot who's come back to Scotland to speak today. Andrew Mackenzie, thank you very much for coming today as well. As you can see, and I would add, if I had time, all the great speakers who've come from within the country. We've got this exceptional body of talent here, probably only rivaled when Adam Smith lectured here on his own. I want to say something about the theme of the conference very briefly. Growth has been the perennial problem for the United Kingdom. Growth and its related issue, productivity. From the 50s onwards, we used to say we managed decline, then in the 60s we mismanaged decline, and then in the 70s we said we declined to manage. You think forward to the problems now that we've got. So much is being done on planning and housing, something on deregulation, quite a lot of work is being done on infrastructure and something on skills. But we think one of the elements that is vitally important to Scotland, but also to the rest of Europe, is a focus on innovation. Now, David Sainsbury is about to speak, and his book, Windows of Opportunity, I do recommend to you. He has studied innovation in almost every country that has very successful innovation in the world. And his conclusion is investment will come if you have the innovative technologies in services and manufacturing, the export industries that can create wealth, that can pay for public services and pay for the eradication of poverty. So David is going to speak on what he has found from his experience of both Britain and around the world. He's then going to be followed by Dan Turner, who's done a specific study which is being issued today on Scotland and what has happened in Scotland. And what Dan has found, and I think he'll explain in more detail, is there is this huge dichotomy. We are very good, the universities, very good at creating new companies, startups, very good at these spin-offs from technology in the universities. We're probably the best in the United Kingdom for doing that. We've got good angel investors that will invest up to 5 million perhaps in a startup. But where we fall down is in the next stage, where we don't seem to be able to create the scale-ups of the size necessary to create the jobs of the future. And Dan will explain that, and David and Dan will then answer some questions on their work. Look around Scotland at the moment. Look at Aberdeen, the potential for renewables. Look at Glasgow, not just shipbuilding, of course, as the past, but also the present. But precision medicine is one of the industries that is moving forward. Look at Edinburgh, fintech and precision medicine as well. Look at Dundee, that has got obviously the drug discovery unit and has got the video games industry, and Chris van der Kuil will speak about that later. There are huge sources of innovation and inventiveness in Scotland, just as has been traditional in our history. The question is, can we turn that into scalable companies that stay in Scotland, invest in Scotland, create jobs in Scotland? And Dan's study suggests we could create 300,000 jobs in the next 10 years, 300,000 well-paying jobs, 300,000 jobs, 120,000 in the new industries, the spin-offs in terms of the service sector, another 180,000, and that is a possibility if we invest in the infrastructure, the skills, the research and development that is necessary to achieve that. Now, my pleasure is introducing David Sainsbury. David Sainsbury worked with me for many years when he was, I believe, and I think every political party would agree, the most successful science and innovation ministry our country has ever had. He revolutionized the way that university laboratories were financed through his partnership with Wellcome. He invested in technology transfer. He had the regions in mind when he was making sure that the proper funding went all around the country. And David has since gone on to write Race to the Top, which is about how we can compete with other countries. It's very interesting. I was in China quite recently, and the Indian finance minister was there. And of course, there's a huge competition between India and China. And he told me that the weather had been very poor. So he'd gone into an international shop in China, and he had to buy a coat for the weather. And he got this cashmere coat, $200 it was, went to the cashier to buy it at the shop assistant and said, I want to buy this coat, but there's no tag on it. There's no label. Don't know who the maker is. And the shop assistant said, well, what label do you want? We'll sew on Burberry, we'll sew on Armani, we'll sew on Canali. And it was his point about the stealing of intellectual property. That is no longer where we really are. China, other countries are moving forward with innovation and technology, and we have got to catch up. I want to say something else about David. His work for charity over the last 50 years and more, he has given through his own Gatsby Foundation more than £1 billion to great causes internationally and nationally. And many people here will have benefited from the work that the Gatsby Foundation has done. I had another way, David, of course, very generous in giving money and getting money. I had another way of raising money. It was called taxation. And some of you may know my house was burgled when I was doing this finance job, and it was quite vandalized, and the police came around and they said, is there anybody who might have a motive? Is there anybody who had a grievance? And I said, well, maybe about 30 million taxpayers. David has given generously. I ask you to welcome him today and to hear what he has to say based on his book, The Windows of Opportunity. Thank you very much.
Gordon, can I thank you first of all for those kind remarks, and particularly for your promotion of my books. The only claim I can really make for this book is if you go on Amazon, you will see that it outsells all other books called Windows of Opportunity. So there are an enormous number, and it does very well on that. I've been asked by Gordon to say something this morning about how innovation and clusters contribute to economic growth and how they can be supported. If you want to raise the UK's rate of economic growth, we need to ask ourselves first why our economy has performed so badly in the last 15 years. This is not because, as many Conservatives believe, our industrialists will not work hard if the top rate of tax is not lowered, or that our workforce will not work hard if they're not constantly at risk of losing their jobs. Nor is it because our markets have become less efficient in recent years, as many economists believe. If you look at the world economy, all G7 countries have experienced lower rates of economic growth since around 1990, when China started becoming a market economy and India started liberalizing its economy. And this is because since that time, all G7 countries have experienced a vast increase in competition from newly developing countries such as China, India, Taiwan, and South Korea. These countries have learned from us how to produce the goods and services we've been producing, and they have the advantage of lower wages. If you doubt this point, look around your house, your kitchen, your living area, your study, and your garage, and ask yourself where your television, your computer, your fridge, or your car come from. If I look around my study at home, I see I have an Apple computer. I have an app, which of course is made largely in China, as indeed the Apple iPhone, a Casio telephone, a Canon printer from Japan, and even the jar of colored paper clips comes from China. Almost all my clothes seem to come from Bangladesh, except those odd moments when I'm wearing a tie in the study, when tie comes from, quite often from France, Italy, or the UK. I'm actually wearing a UK tie for once, just to show solidarity with British industry. But it does show you, just look at what commodities you buy, and you will see how much you're buying from foreign countries, and that is why we have a slow rate of economic growth. So how do we compete in today's global economy? It makes no sense to try and compete by cutting the prices of our products and the wages of our workers. That simply reduces our level of GDP and the standard of living of our workers. What we need to do is create new knowledge-intensive products and services by building on those areas where we already have a competitive advantage, and by using our superior scientific and engineering knowledge and skills. The advanced countries of the world are today involved in what I've called a race to the top, a race for the industrial opportunities of the future. These are new opportunities which are created by technology, R&D, innovation, and workforce skills, and they are to be found in sectors such as advanced computing, advanced materials and manufacturing, advanced communications, technologies, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, plant genetics, and quantum computing. There are economists who will argue that it is investment that is the engine of economic growth. But we have to realize today that capital flows easily around the world, and it flows, as it's always done, to where the best investment opportunities are created by innovation. You can sit in London today and you can invest in Silicon Valley, you can invest in practically any country. Until recently, you could even invest in Chinese venture capital, because that is what modern communications enables you to do. And that's why investment is not the real driver of innovation, of the economy, it's innovation. There are a number of ways that government can support innovation, and one of them is by supporting new, innovative, high-tech clusters. A basic question, therefore, is what are clusters and how can the government support them? Michael Porter, the Harvard Business School academic, who actually was, I think, the first person who really described clusters, described them as geographic concentrations of interconnected companies, specialized suppliers, service providers, firms in related industries, and associated institutions, for example, universities, standard agencies, trade associations, in particular fields that compete but also cooperate. They are important because they enable firms in the cluster to gain competitive advantage. Why do clusters exist? And why are they so important to a country's innovative performance? If we analyze them in depth, the answer to these two questions can be found in the linkages, the complementarities, and the spillovers of technology, skills, information, marketing, and customer needs that are the basis of competitive advantage and are essential for innovation and the growth of firm productivity. It was these features of clusters that Alfred Marshall, probably the last economist known to have visited a factory, recognized when he wrote about industrial districts in his Principles of Economics in 1920. Where an industry has chosen a locality for itself, it's likely to stay there long. So great are the advantages which people following the same skills get from their neighborhood to near neighborhood to one another. The mysteries of trade become no mysteries, but as they were in the air, and children learn many of them unconsciously. Good work is rightly appreciated. Inventions and improvements in machinery, in processes, and in the general organization of business have their merits promptly discussed. If one man starts a new idea, it is taken up by others and combined with suggestions of their own, and thus it becomes the source of further new ideas. As this quotation suggests, clusters are not a new phenomenon, and the Industrial Revolution in the UK was based on a series of such clusters. The cotton industry in Manchester, the steel industry in Sheffield, the ceramics industry in Stoke-on-Trent, and of course the world-beating shipbuilding industry here in Glasgow. It is, however, only in recent times that the success of high-tech clusters has attracted the attention of policymakers and raised the question of whether governments can raise the rate of growth in their countries by supporting the growth of high-tech clusters. I think if it's a question of setting up a high-tech cluster from scratch, I think the answer is clearly that governments can't do so. There isn't a magic recipe which says take one great university, add in large amounts of venture capital, sprinkle with sunshine, and an entrepreneurial culture and a high-tech cluster will spring up. If we look at successful clusters in the making, whether it's in Silicon Valley, in other parts of the United States, or in other parts of the world, we find that a cluster emerges in a specific area due to an entrepreneur or group of entrepreneurs coming together with a potential new source of competitive advantage. If you take Dundee, for example, I think the story there is that Dundee, as you know, was famous for jam, journalism, and I can't remember, jute was the third. And in fact, the video games cluster started because the cartoonists who worked for the various newspapers in Dundee got together with the high-tech people in the university, and that was the start of this extraordinary cluster of video game people from Dundee. I remember when I was a minister being in China, and I had to visit a British delegation of people there on a trade mission. And I asked them, you know, what are you here, what are you selling? thinking, and they said, we're from Scotland, so I thought, you must be selling whiskey. And they said, no, no, it's video games. And I realized then that Scotland has this extraordinary cluster of video games people, which is world class. This explanation of clusters, i.e. that it's people, entrepreneurs, getting together with a technology, is valid for Silicon Valley in the 1950s and the 1960s, but also for other more recent, well-researched clusters in the United States, such as those in North Carolina, San Diego, and Seattle, as well as those in places outside the US, such as Taiwan, Israel, and Cambridge in England. In the Silicon Valleys of the 1960s, in the other United States innovation clusters, and indeed also in Cambridge, England, the technology was the integrated circuit industry. In Israel, it was the internet and network security markets, while in Scandinavia and Taiwan, it was hardware and equipment opportunities in new kinds of devices, such as cell phones and personal digital assistants. This kind of entrepreneurial matchmaking is not something that government should try to do. It's not something that remotely government officials can begin to do. It's something that has to be left to entrepreneurs. But where such an innovative cluster has been formed, governments, I believe, can play a role in supporting them. Turning now to Scotland, there are a number of potential high-valued clusters which government support, which with government support could flourish. They're precision medicine and the space tech clusters here in Glasgow. As I've said, there's the video games in Dundee and financial services in Edinburgh. Also the whiskey industry and the tourism and Taunton clusters, while in Aberdeen there is the whole energy services and the energy industry which supports North Sea oil. And I suspect there are other potential clusters if one looks carefully for them. A major challenge which government faces, therefore, if it wants to increase Scotland's rate of growth, is a way to find and support such clusters. All the evidence from other countries suggests that the only way to effectively support clusters is to do so at a city-region level. I appreciate in Scotland, unlike in England, metro mayors have not yet been introduced. But if you want to support high-tech clusters, this is something I think you should seriously consider, with Greater Glasgow being given powers similar to those devolved to Greater Manchester and the West Midlands. If you do introduce them, there are 3 policy changes which the government can make which will materially help the development of high-tech clusters. They are, firstly, promoting local economic growth by joining up transport and spatial planning at a city level. Joining up transport and spatial planning at a city level can make commuting cheaper and quicker, which in turn generates 2 major benefits. Firstly, it widens labor markets, and secondly, an efficient transport system enables employment and businesses to cluster densely where they have the best access to knowledge, such as in city centres. I have to say, when I make this remark, I also think, yeah, it'd have great benefits for the people who use the transport. And it really is one of the most idiotic things that we do in England and Scotland, which is not to make certain that the same people do spatial planning and transport planning. Because if there's anything which is sensible, it is those 2 things are done at the same level by the same people. To achieve such an improvement in city transport, the government must move statutory spatial planning authority up from local authorities to metro mayors, and some transport planning responsibilities down from central government to metro mayors. Secondly, I'd like to see the job of coordinating courses run by FE colleges with the labour market needs of a city given to metro mayors. The budget for FE colleges should therefore be devolved to metro mayors, rather than being allocated by the central government, which cannot possibly have any clear idea what are the specific needs of, say, the manufacturing sector in the Glasgow region. I should say in this context that I think the Scottish Government would do well also to look at the new system, a national system of T-level qualification, which has now been introduced in England. This is a single national system of technical qualifications, which is quality controlled by government, and where the knowledge and skills which must be acquired are set by industry. Again, you would think a rather basic and sensible thing to do. This is replacing a system where there were thousands of qualifications of varying quality which did not necessarily meet the needs of industry. Also, students didn't know which qualifications to take, and businessmen didn't know what skills a young person had acquired by getting a specific qualification. If one wants technical qualifications to have the same reputation as academic qualifications, this is the route one has to take. I should say that I played a part in producing this new system, and it was based very much on doing something which I don't think the British government does nearly enough, which is to look around the world, see who has the best system, in this case, who has the best technical education system, and then see what they're doing, which we are not doing. When we did that, in doing this report, what we discovered is that all the best technical education systems in the world have a national system of qualifications. And so that's what we've introduced, and which has now been rolled out much too slowly by the government. Thirdly, we need to find a way to strengthen research done in universities, which is an important input to a specific cluster. The last Conservative government invented such a scheme called Strength in Places Fund, which did just that, and which I think did help the precision medicine initiative here in Glasgow early on. But for reasons which I don't understand, the last Conservative government stopped using it. This was clearly a serious mistake, and I hope the present government will bring it back in some form. So finally, can I say, a growth strategy for a country needs to have three pillars. Firstly, industrial sector strategies. Secondly, strategies to support industries with the scientific and technological knowledge, the skills and the infrastructure that they need. And thirdly, support for clusters. Only if industry in Scotland is given support in all these three areas does it have a chance of growing rapidly in the world race to the top. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. And let me begin by saying what an honour it is to be speaking to you all today, to be following Gordon, Lord Sainsbury, the Lord Provost. My name's Dan Turner. I'm a Sheffield-based economist looking at questions of how we can make sure that all of the regional economies, national economies of the UK, and all the communities within them can thrive in a modern economy. And it falls to me to introduce the report that we're launching today and that will frame from this conference, Innovation Nation, Good Jobs for Scotland's Future. I'm going to talk, probably half of what I'm going to say will be around our diagnosis of what's happening in Scotland at the moment, parts of which you've already heard from Gordon and Lord Sainsbury. And then I'll set out quickly our 5-point plan for how you might try to grapple with some of these policy challenges. So to start with the bad news, I don't know if you can quite make this out, but it's a chart that many of you will be familiar with. You'll have seen in newspapers, books, boardrooms over the course of the past decade or two, which is the stagnation and stalling of productivity growth in Scotland, but also, this is true of the UK, across the OECD and the G7, that something has happened recently such that the economy is not growing at the pace that it did before. Up to about 2010, trend growth in productivity, this measure is for Scotland, it's how much value added you create per hour worked, was growing at about 2% per year. And it was almost taken as a law of nature that would be the case. We'd seen that level of growth for decades through boom and bust, across business cycles, through the whole process of deindustrialization. But then something happened, and there still isn't consensus on this, but something happened in the early 2010s here and elsewhere that led to that trend growth rate dropping from 2% a year to about 0.4% a year in the case of Scotland. And this isn't just a North Sea energy story either. It's true if you strip that out. So economists can do something called a decomposition, where we try to dig a little bit more underneath that headline and say mechanically what's driving that slowdown. And a reasonable rule of thumb for the UK is that about a third of that slowdown is coming from falling capital accumulation and investment, but 2/3 comes from something called total factor productivity. So on that first point about just falling capital intensity and investment, Scotland has had very low levels for decades of private investment in new forms of capital, as has the UK. The UK has been at the bottom of the G7 league table for decades as well. Cumulatively, this has really mounted up now, and just this week, colleagues at the Productivity Institute in Manchester published a paper to show that a worker in the UK has about a third less, so 2/3 of the capital of a worker in France, Germany, the US, or the Netherlands. And with France in particular, the contrast is really stark. So a worker has about half of the stuff with which to produce their outputs if they're based in the UK than if they're based in France. But just tackling that problem of low investment will be nowhere near enough to reverse Scotland's slowdown in productivity, because 2/3 of that gap comes from something called total factor productivity. Usually this is what economists attribute to ideas, innovation, both the basic ideas coming out of universities, but also how we can make more effective use of production processes, how we design, how we market our goods. Basically, ideas, innovation, and the themes that we're talking about today. So there is no path for a return to a high-income, high-productivity growth economy for Scotland without raising the rate and the level and the quality of innovation. And this is as near as we get if you can raise productivity to a panacea in economic policy, because it makes all of the other economic trade-offs that we have to grapple with harder. If we don't fix this, it will be harder to raise standards of living, to reform public services, and to create good jobs everywhere. So that's the bad news. But fortunately, and this isn't cheap flattery because we're here at the University of Glasgow, but there's a huge amount of positive news to share for Scotland. For me, this was the revelation doing the research, that it really is true to say that Scotland already in the UK could be the best place to start and begin scaling an innovative business. I've got 4 indicative stats on the slide here. For universities, Scotland's got 3 of the top 100 in the world. That means per head, Scottish universities are, or Scotland's university scene is the best in the world. It's ahead of Switzerland, it's ahead of Singapore. And it's not just that the basic research and the teaching is excellent, but Scotland's very effective at producing spin-outs and commercializing some of those ideas. Within the UK, the university spin-out rate per head in Scotland is the highest of any nation or region. And it's not just university spin-outs, this is also true of other high-tech, high-potential firms across the economy. So if you found a company in Scotland, it's the only place in the UK that's more likely than London to receive equity investment at early stages, aided by things like the fact that half of the UK's most active angel investor networks are based in Scotland. So there really is something spectacular happening at an early stage level of when we think about an innovation economy in Scotland, and that is no doubt, this is a relatively recent story, I should be clear. It's because of progress over the past 10, 15 years by many of the people who I know are in this room and have been active in trying to improve that ecosystem. So it leaves us with a paradox. I'm going to have to explain this because it's really, really small on this slide. If Scotland is so good at producing world-leading ideas, world-leading businesses at that early stage, why is that not translating into high levels of investment, productivity, and an economy-wide effect? What this chart shows, and it's in the report, so you can get into all of the numbers there if you want to see it in detail, is that Scotland has the second highest rate in the OECD of public sector spending on R&D. So about £1 in every pound in Scotland, one in every £100 in Scotland is spent on higher education, research and development. Second only to Denmark for the whole of the OECD, the rich industrialized economies. But Scotland's mid-table at best when it comes to business R&D. And the ratio between the two, which is the bang for the buck that you get for every pound that we spend subsidizing innovation through the public sector and higher education, how much private activity do we get for that? Scotland is almost at the bottom of the OECD league table. It's only ahead of the Latin American economies, and I think Latvia and Lithuania from memory. So every pound spent in Scotland generates, I think, £1.46 of private sector research and development. That's about half the rate of the UK as a whole, about a third the rate of the OECD as a whole and the EU, and less than 1/5 of the return that you get for public investment in R&D compared to the US. So there's this gap in private innovation in Scotland. And what that looks like in practice, I think, is what we observe are highly innovative firms, companies like Exscientia, who were an AI-driven drug discovery company out of the University of Dundee, now a unicorn, but in order to realize that deal, they relocated to the University of Oxford's science campus. So you face a choice as a Scottish company, typically in this sector. Once you reach a level of maturity, if you want to go further and not just sell up your IP, do you move to elsewhere in the UK, to the US, to another market, because they struggle to get those cluster dynamics that Lord Sainsbury described working in Scotland to make it attractive to invest here. And we don't have to look very far away to see what a better model would look like, because the UK as a whole, the rest of the UK, already has twice that level of bang for buck. So it looks like around the innovation economy of Cambridge and life sciences, where you have AstraZeneca as a major anchor, and then this supply chain of smaller firms introducing dynamism, introducing new ideas around them. It looks like Rolls-Royce in its role anchoring advanced manufacturing in the East Midlands. So we can see that it's possible within the UK to create these innovation clusters, and we just need to do the work in Scotland to get there. So on policy, I think bear these three goals in mind. One thing we haven't discussed yet is that there is a job right now to just protect what Scotland has. Even though I'm saying it's all rosy in those early stages, we have to recognize that there are very significant threats, not least to the higher education sector at the moment, in its financing, in its access to students, global networks, exposure to global capital markets. There's a whole host of challenges to what's working well in Scotland already, and at the very least we have to maintain the current position. This isn't saying let's swing the pendulum away, it's how do we build up the parts of the system that are missing. So second, we also need to keep that progress and momentum, even though there are really good stories to tell about early stage equity finance and investment in Scotland. We're still receiving less bang for our buck. So Scotland does have the most university spin-outs per head of any nation or region in the UK, but if it was producing at the same rate for the R&D funding it receives, there'd be about 50% more university spin-outs than there are now. So good progress, but more progress to come. And then finally, most importantly and most innovatively from a policy point of view, how do we reorientate Scotland's environment so that more of those firms can then plant and take root in Scotland and scale? So, our 5-point plan. I'll try and rattle through this fairly quickly because I think it's very complementary to what Lord Sainsbury's already said, actually. Our first recommendation is that we need a single strategy for Scotland, a single joined-up vision that's co-owned, co-designed by the UK government, the Scottish government, and local government. The reason we say that is because there's a pragmatic argument that there's no silver bullet for innovation policy, that we need to be coordinating across skills, trade and investment, infrastructure, planning, you name it. Almost all of these ingredients are relevant to creating a successful and thriving innovation-led economy. And those powers are distributed at the moment. Some are retained in Westminster, some are held at Holyrood level, some are held at a local level. And the absence of coordination, absence of a shared set of goals over the past few decades has led to this proliferation in Scotland of different agencies, strategies, documents, which is not necessarily wrong in and of itself, but in practice, what we hear from the business community in Scotland is it's created a bit of a spaghetti junction that people struggle to navigate and negotiate when it comes to accessing public support. And it leads to a lot of people writing strategies and giving talks like this, rather than being out there rolling up their sleeves and actually doing the work of attracting the investment. And as a result, Scotland is smaller than the sum of its parts, I think. So there's an opportunity to consolidate, to coordinate, and start to deliver some of that value for money that's lacking. Where we think that that then needs to be directed through these consolidated strategies, consolidated funds, is into what we call growth zones. So this is our idea for the sort of physical campuses that allow universities, innovative businesses, multinational anchor businesses to sit side by side and co-locate, as Lord Sainsbury recommended earlier. And economists have shown just how quickly these benefits of co-location tail off. So if you're on the top floor of a building compared to the bottom floor, you see a reduction in the productivity of the fact that you're in the same building. If you have to walk more for the most knowledge-intensive activity than 20, 25 minutes, you may as well be in a different city. So physical proximity is really important. How do we build those physical spaces in Scotland, I think is a real-life question. And more can be done in policy to support that through planning reform, through tax incentives, through direct grants to assemble land, and so on. And this builds on work that's already happening in the Riverside Innovation District, just down the road from here, that the University of Glasgow has been leading, in the Bio Quarter in Edinburgh for life sciences. It's already happening. Let's supercharge that. In order to do that, we need, our third recommendation, someone who's clearly accountable and tasked with leading that process. And what we propose, what Our Scottish Future has proposed in the past, is the creation of Scottish combined authorities who are capable of being accountable and coordinating that activity. This is based on something like the successful Manchester model that many of you will be familiar with. And it's not a substitute to cooperation with Holyrood and Westminster. All of that needs to go hand in hand, and that's where you need the shared strategy. But it provides a single locus of someone who can go out, champion the growth zone in Greater Glasgow, broker those deals with multinational companies alongside the Trade Minister at a UK level and in the Scottish Government in order to bring in that flagship investment. Then our final two recommendations: back what works, don't give up progress for where we are at the moment. This is that protect and progress argument that I was making earlier. Scotland already has a huge amount of innovation strength. It already is really delivering on those early stages. And at a moment of straitened public finances, now is not the time to reduce funding for universities, or especially the funding for applied research and innovation and spin-out support that universities have been developing over the past decade. Then last but not least, I think we have this in at the end on make sure that innovation is inclusive. And it kind of galls me, because often you'll read these strategies where they'll set out something about economics, and then at the end they're like, oh, and of course you've got to make sure it's equitable. And normally it's because that's the right thing to do and the moral thing to do, which it is. But there's also a strong argument around the efficiency case for making sure that innovation itself is inclusive by design. Over the past few years, there's been work out of the US from the Growth Lab at Harvard's economics department that helps us to put a number on this. So they find that if children from poorer families, communities that are less connected into innovation economies, so like they don't see themselves, they don't see their role in Glasgow's shiny PhD-led research labs because their dad never went there, they don't know anyone who's ever been in that world. They innovate at about the quarter of the rate when they're adults as their better connected peers. I think that's right. But the headline would be that if you could level up, to coin a phrase, and bring the level of innovation across the board to the level of the best performing children, the best connected children, the rate of innovation of patenting would quadruple in the US, and I think you'd find something very similar in the UK. So if that's the barrier, the scale of the potential gain of more inclusion would probably swamp almost everything else that I've just been discussing. So we ought to be spending as much time, energy, effort in thinking about how we connect innovation into communities as we do thinking about how we raise investment for wet labs or whatever it might be in Glasgow. Those are our recommendations. Can I just make one final point, Jim? I know we're running a little bit late, which is building on the idea that this can be quite dry and technocratic. I think we've heard the C word quite a lot already of clusters, but there's another C word that we haven't really used of communities and a sense of identity and that sense of value that people get from work. So I was struck with what people have said already about shipbuilding repeatedly in Clydeside. And for me, what this is all about, for bringing an innovation economy to scale, is to say that Scotland has led already in the past in what at the time were incredibly innovative industries that created bulk jobs, mass jobs, and a sense of enduring identity and pride that people still evoke, even though most of those jobs have disappeared, decades, if not centuries ago in some places. Our challenge, and I think the challenge of everyone in this room, is to say, how do we create that claim on the future for Scotland's communities going forward? So how is it that the grandkid of someone who worked in the shipyards can say, I'm going to be working in the satellite industries of Glasgow, and then that inspires their grandchildren in turn to think that Scotland is the place where you can be a world-leading innovator, and that can create widespread, resilient prosperity. So I'm very excited for the rest of this conference when we start to delve into the mechanics of what that looks like. And thank you for humoring me this morning.
Do a couple of questions. Yep. Thank you very much to both of those speakers. Now, we've got a very full day ahead of us. We've got a few minutes, I think, at which we can ask questions of these speakers. There are energetic young persons at the back with microphones who will be leaping about the room to those who wish to. Particularly, if I may say, you might want to direct your questions to David, because Dan will be back later. There's more of Dan to come. Now, the lady, the front here in blue, one of my energetic young persons.
About scale up. This has been something that has been a passion of why UK cannot scale up firms. I'm an engineer by trade. I worked in the high-tech industry in Europe and in the Far East, traveling across Taiwan, China, Japan, Hong Kong. And in my work in the innovation industry, I got so obsessed by what drives innovation and productivity that I took a radical career shift, spent more than a decade into trying to come to this answer, and I actually got a doctorate from Glasgow here in innovation and productivity and growth 5 years ago. And the pinnacle of that doctorate was, why do UK firms not scale up? Now, I like the fact there's not enough attention. We are great in innovation startups in the UK and have been, but they don't scale up. And in a policy roundtable, which I managed to organize, in which Herman Hauser was here, Gareth Williams was here, we asked, what is your biggest issue that you can't scale up? And although, David, you make a great point, clusters are needed, but it's what is in those clusters that matters. And the answer lies, we quote AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca is a spin-off ICI. It's not a new company. If you look in the top 50 by market cap, we've only got AstraZeneca in there. If you look in the EU Innovation Scoreboard, AstraZeneca again. That's the only one that is contributing to the business R&D. So what you need in those there are two clues. There's one is the answer lies in Alice Amston's work in Rise of the Rest. What did those countries do? And what can UK? And it is, I'll just take one, it's technology upskilling. The other answer lies in what Silicon Valley, in particular what Fred Terman did in order to get Silicon Valley. It is, yes, venture capitalism, but it's all, and Department of Defense, don't get me started, they spend loads, but really what they did by bringing in Lockheed Martin, GE, Kodak, and they got that big, large firms. We don't have them anymore in the UK. They are gone. ARM is gone. So what my question to David would be, what can we do to actually bring substitute that mentorship from those large firms in order to make those clusters really work? Sorry for a very long.
Okay, I'm going to take two questions at once. There's the gentleman at the back there.
Good morning, and equally from me, I'm Stuart Patrick. I'm the Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. So thank you to Gordon and to David and indeed to Jim and Dan for all that you have said so far. Very quick question, and it is about the definition of clusters and sectors. I was involved in some of the work looking at how the investment zone for the Glasgow City region ought to be allocating its resources. And some of the most interesting projects emerging from the universities tended to be cross-industry, multidisciplinary. So quantum mixing with financial services, or sensors mixing with advanced manufacturing, say in welding techniques. How are you going to go about defining clusters without putting badges on geographies that limit that ability for cross-sector working?
Okay. Thank you. Now, David or Dan, who would like to go first in responding to this? David?
Shall I just... I don't... The thing of bringing in multinational companies to be the basis of clusters, I think is the wrong way to think about it. I mean, the basic way is to grow clusters up in an area, and then produce your multinational companies which spring out of that. I don't think particularly multinationals produce the basis of a cluster. That's something different. Clusters come up because people, entrepreneurs, see an opportunity, technological opportunity, and then produce the cluster. If you take the question of ARM, I mean, the interesting thing, the ownership of ARM has gone abroad, but ARM stays in this country where all the essential work is done. So, in a sense, that's not a great loss, I don't think. The cross-sector thing, again, I find myself often in these conferences talking about what government needs to do to improve things. But there are certain things that government can't do and will never do well. And one of them is sort of making those connections between different technologies. That's what entrepreneurs and technologists do, and government is completely incapable of doing. You can see it if you like. If you take the funding of science, which I know a bit about, every so often governments think, we must encourage more cross-disciplinary research, and so they have schemes for cross-disciplinary grants, and achieves nothing except people take their grants, which they're going to do anyway, and they say they're cross-disciplinary and they meet up with friends. Cross-disciplinary research takes place when one researcher says, I've got an idea to do something, but there's this other bit of technology which this other researcher's got, so why don't we get together and do joint research? It's not about governments ever getting involved in this. So I'm very keen to get governments give the support they can, but not to get involved in what in fact are entrepreneurial activities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Now, there's 100 other questions we could ask, but we've got lots more to hear from. So can you thank both Dan and David?